It's safe to say that a lot of the characters in the Soulsborne universe have some sort of tragic backstory. In a previous video, I went over the heroes of the Souls universe and talked about what made them so tragic. But today, I wanted to talk about the villains, or in better terms, antagonists, as most of the characters that I'm going to talk about aren't necessarily evil. Sure, they've done questionable things, but it's somewhat understandable to why they would act out like the way they did. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of the more tragic villains in the Soul series and find out what specific event molded them into who they are currently. And just a disclaimer, I'm not going to go over every single character in the series nor every single villain. I'm just going to talk about the ones that stood out to me the most. So if you wanted me to talk about a specific person, just let me know in the comments below. Anyways, let's talk about the first tragic villain. Messmer's story is one of tragedy, marked by a curse that shaped his entire existence. From birth, he was afflicted with the Abyssal Serpent, a mysterious and malevolent force. Speculated to be an outer god, the serpent's motives and reasons for choosing Messmer remains unknown. What is clear is the devastating impact it had on his life. Messmer even lost his eyes to the curse. To help him manage this dark power, Marika, his mother, placed a seal within him in the form of an enchanted eye to keep the serpent influence at bay. Despite this, Messmer rose to prominence, becoming the leader of a powerful army that served directly under Marika. His loyalty to her was absolute, and this loyalty would lead him to play a pivotal role in one of the most devastating crusades in the history of the Lands of Shadow. Marika ordered Messmer to wage war against the Hornsent people, a group infamous for their horrifying experiments. They subjected shamans, whom Marika is related to gruesome transformations, stuffing them into jars and turning them into monstrous abominations. While the Hornsent were far from innocent, this crusade was brutal and unrelenting. Messmer, devoted to his mother, led his army through the Lands of Shadow, destroying the Hornsent forces. Despite their own powerful warriors, such as the Divine Beast, the Hornsent were no match for Messmer's legion. The victory showcased the sheer strength of Messmer and his forces, cementing his place as a fearsome leader. At this point, it might seem like Messmer's life is going well. He had a family, the respect of his mother, and a significant military victory. But the curse of the Abyssal Serpent still haunted him. No matter what Marika tried, she could not remove it. This dark power clashed with her vision of a perfect world under the Golden Order. For Marika, Messmer's existence became a liability. In pursuit of her ambitions, Marika made the heart-wrenching decision to abandon her son. She left Messmer behind as she built a new kingdom and surrounded herself with a new family and worked to establish her Golden Order. Messmer, stripped of purpose and family, withdrew into isolation, retreating to his chambers. With no dreams and goals, he was left alone with his curse and bitterness. When the tarnished, us, finally encounter Messmer, he has become a shadow of his former self. We then challenge Messmer for his kindling, as this will allow us to burn the dark vines covering Ener Elim. After a fierce duel, Messmer utters his final words.
Marika, a curse upon thee.
This line reveals the depth of his pain and the anger he harbored towards his mother, who had abandoned him after all his sacrifices. His resentment towards Marika, though buried beneath layers of loyalty, is unmistakably. Messmer's life is a stark reminder of the harsh cost of loyalty. Though he was no saint, his story is undeniably tragic. Born with a terrible curse and used as a stepping stone for Marika's divine ascension, he was ultimately rewarded with abandonment and despair. Marika is one of the most complex figures in Soulsborne lore. While she's far from a saint, her story reveals why she became the way she did. Her decisions shaped the world of Elden Ring, and while many were ruthless, her actions were rooted in the pain and suffering she endured in her early life. Marika's people, the shamans, were brutally mistreated. They were tortured, beaten, and experimented on by groups like the Hornsent. Many of these shamans were turned into horrific creatures such as the Jar People, grotesque creations stuffed into containers and stripped of their humanity. Witnessing such atrocities left deep scars on Marika, fueling her desire to create her own order. To achieve this vision, Marika sought power and made difficult, often cruel choices. She aligned herself with the Greater Will, an outer god that granted her strength and the authority to create the Golden Order. Through this, she established a new world order where her ideals could reign supreme. However, this alliance came at a cost. The Greater Will demanded absolute loyalty, and Marika's personal desires often clashed with its control. Marika's ruthlessness is undeniable. She orchestrated crusades and wars, wiping out anyone who opposed her vision of the Golden Order. Her actions led to countless deaths, and she abandoned even those closest to her, like her son Messmer, when they no longer fit into her plans. To many, she's seen as a tyrant, someone who put her ambitions above all else. But Marika's story is also one of sacrifice. She did not act out of malice, but out of desperate need to avenge her people from the horrors they've had faced. The pain of her past drove her to reshape the world, even if it meant committing acts that others would view as unforgivable. And I like to believe that Marika wasn't always a tyrant, but someone who genuinely wanted a better world, but as time goes by, her heart became cold. Despite all her efforts, Marika's dream began to crumble. Her actions fractured the lands between, and her children, each bearing the burden of her vision, fought amongst themselves for power. The very order she created began to fail, and the Greater Will, displeased with her rebellion, took action against her. In a moment of defiance, Marika shattered the Elden Ring. This act of rebellion against the Greater Will was her way of rejecting the control it had over her and her world. However, it came at a great cost. The lands between fell into chaos, and Marika was imprisoned by the Elden Beast, the living embodiment of the Greater Will. Stripped of her freedom and power, she was left to be in captivity, a prisoner of the very god she had once served. Marika's story is tragic because it shows the cost of trying to create a perfect world. Her pain drove her to reshape reality, but in doing so, she became a villain in the eyes of many. Her downfall is a reminder that even the most powerful figures can be broken by their past and their choices. Father Gascoigne's story reflects the harsh and unforgiving nature of Yharnam and the horrors that plague its people. Though his actions were violent and monstrous by the time you meet him, his past paints a picture of a man who tried to protect his family but ultimately fell to the curse of the hunt. Gascoigne was a hunter of beasts, tasked with protecting Yharnam from the terrifying creatures that roamed its streets during the hunt. Skilled and determined, he carried out his duties. However, the hunt is not just a physical battle, but also a mental one. Hunters must fight against the madness that comes from witnessing and partaking in such constant bloodshed. For Gascoigne, the struggle became too much. Unlike some hunters, Gascoigne had a family, his wife Viola and their daughter. He loved them deeply, but the hunt created a growing divide between him and his humanity. The more he fought and spilled blood, the more he succumbed to the beast within. The Healing Church encouraged hunters to rely on blood for strength, but this blood also brought them closer to the beast that they hunted. Gascoigne was no exception. Viola, recognizing the changes in her husband, tried to help him. She would play a special music box that reminded Gascoigne of his family and his humanity whenever he started to lose control. Tragically, this was not enough. During one of the hunts, Gascoigne succumbed fully to the beastly curse, losing himself entirely. When the player encounters him, Gascoigne is no longer the man he once was. He is wild and feral, driven only by bloodlust. The arena where you're facing him is littered with signs of his madness, broken tombstones, and disregarded remains, a grim reflection of his complete loss of humanity. As the fight progresses, Gascoigne transforms into a beast, showing how far he has fallen. The tragedy deepens when he discovers Viola's fate. She went searching for him, likely hoping to bring him back to his senses. However, she was killed, presumably by her husband in his monstrous state. Their daughter is left orphaned, unaware of the full extent of the horror that has unfolded. This adds another layer of sorrow to Gascoigne's story. Father Gascoigne's downfall is a powerful example of Bloodborne's central theme, the thin line between humanity and monstrosity. He was a devoted hunter and a loving father, but the hunt consumed him, turning him into the very thing he once fought against. At first glance, Quelaag may seem just like another terrifying boss, a spider-like creature fused with a human-looking woman. But her story, revealed through the lore and subtle hints in the game, shows that she's more than just a monster. Quelaag is a victim of her circumstances, forced to become what she is to protect what little remains of her family. Quelaag is one of the daughters of Chaos, children of the Witch of Izalith. When the witch attempted to recreate the first flame using her powerful sorceries, the spell went horribly wrong. Instead of reigniting the flame, she unleashed chaos upon the world, birthing demons and corrupting everything around her. Quelaag and her siblings were caught in the disaster, and their bodies were horribly transformed by the chaos. Quelaag's lower half fused with a massive grotesque spider, while her upper half retained her original form. Despite her monstrous appearance, she retained some semblance of her compassion. Unlike many other demons born from chaos, she still cared about her family, particularly her sister, the Fair Lady. The Fair Lady suffered even more than Quelaag. Her body was ravaged by illness and corruption, leaving her frail and blind. To survive, she required humanity, a precious resource in the world of Dark Souls. Quelaag, unable to reverse this cursed state, took it upon herself to gather humanity to keep her sister alive. This is why she attacks the player. She's not driven by evil or malice, but by the desperate need to protect her sister. Quelaag's role as a protector makes her a tragic figure. She resides at the entrance of Lost Izalith, one of the most wretched and inhospitable places in the game. There, she uses her power to defend her sister's sanctuary, the hidden chamber beneath her lair. The chamber holds the Fair Lady and is also a refuge for a handful of Chaos servants who revere the sisters. Quelaag willingly faces danger and bloodshed to keep her sister safe. When the player encounters Quelaag, they may see her only as a boss standing in their way. Her monstrous form and aggressive attacks makes it easy to view her as another obstacle to overcome. However, understanding her backstory reveals that her actions are not evil but born of love and sacrifice. She fights not for herself but for her sister, making her death at the player's hand all more tragic. Quelaag's story embodies one of the core themes of Dark Souls, the cost of survival in a cruel and broken world. She was once a daughter of great power and potential, reduced to a monstrous existence by forces beyond her control. Despite her cursed form though, she still tried to protect her sister at all costs. Quelaag is a reminder that not every enemy in Dark Souls is truly evil. Her actions, while hostile to the player, are ultimately driven by love, making her one of the most tragic and sympathetic figures in the series. I know in a previous video I considered the Ivory King a hero, and trust me, he still is, but in our eyes he's technically still an antagonist, which made me include him here as well. And I know what you're saying, well, wouldn't every boss be considered an antagonist? Look man, just go with the flow. The Ivory King once ruled over Eliam Lois and is thought to have come from Farasa, where he served as a knight of high rank. He was known for his kindness and strength, always standing up for people no matter the cost. When Alsana, a fragment of Monos and the Child of the Dark, sought refuge in his kingdom, he granted her safely, likely aware of the darkness she carried within her. Eventually, the ancient chaos was found beneath the kingdom. The Ivory King used his powerful soul to establish Eliam Lois and hold the chaos at bay. A grand cathedral was built to suppress the flames, but it could not be controlled. To fight against the spreading chaos, the king stationed his knights and golems throughout the city and sent others directly into the flames. Tragically, none of these knights ever returned. Feeling his soul weakening, the Ivory King silently left his kingdom, entrusting everything to Alsana. He ventured into chaos himself alongside his knights and was consumed by its flames. After his sacrifice, the Ivory Gates opened, leaving Eliam Lois to crumble into a frozen, lifeless ruin. The Ivory King was truly a noble ruler who cared deeply for his people and was willing to give everything to protect them. He even saw the potential for good in Alsana, preventing her from becoming as destructive as Nashandra. Without a doubt, he was a hero. However, his sacrifice didn't save his kingdom in the end, and it still fell into ruin shortly after his departure. What makes his story even sadder is the fact that chaos overtook him, leaving you and the remaining knights to put him down for good. It's a tragic tale of a man who gave everything to fight a great evil, only to lose himself to it. At least he didn't fall into madness or try to destroy the world, but his story is undeniably heartbreaking. Mohg, Lord of Blood, is another complex and tragic figure. While his actions appear monstrous on the surface, his story reveals a deeper layer of manipulation and misunderstanding that paints him as both victim and a villain. Born as one of the cursed Omen twins along with his brother Morgott, Mohg was rejected from the moment of his birth. As an Omen, he bore grotesque horns and a twisted form that marked him as impure in the eyes of the Golden Order. Like Morgott, Mohg was cast into the subterranean shunning grounds, forced to live in isolation beneath the capital city of Leyndell. This rejection by his family and society fueled a sense of resentment in him that would shape his path. Unlike Morgott, who remained loyal to the Golden Order despite his treatment, Mohg turned away from the Earth Tree and sought his own power. His journey led to the Formless Mother, an outer god of blood who granted Mohg mastery over blood magic. In his devotion to the Formless Mother, Mohg sought to establish a dynasty of his own, free from the oppression of the Golden Order. However, the heart of Mohg's story lies in his connection to Mikola, the Empyrean child of Queen Marika. It is widely believed that Mohg kidnapped Mikola, who was encased in a cocoon attempting to awaken him through twisted blood rituals. But deeper lore reveals a shocking twist. Miquella had bewitched Mohg into taking him to the Land of Shadow. This manipulation cast Mohg's action in a new light, suggesting that he might not have been acting entirely of his own free will. Miquella's goal was to reach the Land of Shadow. By influencing Mohg, Miquella ensured that he would be taken there. Mohg, believing he was fulfilling his own ambition to create a dynasty with Miquella as its foundation, was in fact a pawn in Miquella's grander scheme. This revelation adds an element of tragedy to Mohg's story, as it suggests that his devotion and efforts to awaken Miquella were based on false assumptions. When the player encounters Mohg in his palace, he's surrounded by followers who worship him and his blood-soaked power. The fight against him is intense, showcasing his mastery of blood magic as he invokes the Formless Mother's powers. Yet beneath his violent exterior lies a being consumed by his false dream that was planted onto him. In the end, Mohg's story is a tragic reflection of the themes of ambition and manipulation. While Mohg may not have been a saint since he was the leader of a blood cult, the fact that he was placed under a spell by Miquella to do his bidding and then was eventually killed because of this is definitely tragic. Speaking of omens, we have Morgott. Morgott's story is a bit sad, shaped by the circumstances of his birth and the harsh world he grew up in. Born as an omen, a being cursed with horns protruding from their skin, he was viewed as monstrous and cast out by society. Queen Marika, his mother, despised omens, partly due to her own bad experience with horned individuals. She forced all omens, including her own children, to live in the sewers beneath Leyndell, isolated from the rest of the world. Life was cruel for omens, as they were often hunted and hated simply for their appearance. While Morgott stayed loyal to the Golden Order despite his suffering, his twin brother Mohg took a different path. Mohg left the sewers and sought power through the Formless Mother, abandoning the ideals of the Order. Morgott, on the other hand, clung to his belief in the Golden Order, even though it had cast him aside. Over time, he honed his skills with a sword and grew stronger, waiting for a chance to prove his worth. When the Shattering began and chaos overtook the lands between, Morgott stepped up to protect the capital. He became its shadow ruler, a hidden king guarding the throne and the Erdtree. To keep his identity as an omen secret, Morgott created a projection of himself named Morgott. Morgott acted as his alter ego, leading armies and keeping intruders away from Leyndell. Meanwhile, Morgott remained in the shadows, defending the entrance to the Erdtree and ensuring that no one unworthy could claim the title of Elden Lord. To Morgott, no Tarnished or anyone else deserves such a role. Morgott faced many battles over the years, but when the Tarnished came along, they proved to be way too strong. After defeating Morgott's projection, the Tarnished entered Leyndell and eventually confronted Morgott himself at the foot of the Erdtree. The battle was fierce, but the Tarnished emerged victorious. In his final moments, Morgott warned them that, like him, they too were unworthy of becoming Elden Lord. What makes Morgott's story so tragic is the way his life was shaped by forces outside of his control. He was born an omen, a condition seen as a curse, and abandoned by his own mother. Despite this, he remained devoted to the Golden Order, serving it faithfully, even though it saw him and his kinds as abomination. Morgott gave everything to protect the Erdtree and the Order's ideals, even sacrificing his life in the process. Yet, for all his loyalty and effort, he was never accepted or rewarded. In the end, Morgott's unwavering devotion to the very system that rejected him defines his tragedy. He spent his life fighting for an ideal that would never see him as more than a cursed being, making his tale one of sorrow and unfulfilled purpose. Now here's an entry you didn't expect. Yes, I know the Bed of Chaos is a terrible boss, but we're not here to talk about quality. We're here to talk about tragic villains, and since the Bed of Chaos is considered a villain by many, I included it here. The Bed of Chaos represents the devastating consequences of ambition, desperation, and tampering powers beyond control. Its story begins with the Witch of Izalith, one of the original lords who helped defeat the dragons at the dawn of the Age of Fire. As the first flame began to fade, threatening to end the Age of Lords, the witch sought to recreate it using her mastery of pyromancy and the power of her soul. However, her attempt to create a new flame went horribly wrong. Instead of rekindling the first flame, she accidentally birthed the Chaos Flame, a twisted and uncontrollable force that unleashed destruction upon Izalith. The Chaos Flame corrupted everything it touched, transforming the witch and her daughters into grotesque demonic forms. The witch herself became the Bed of Chaos, a writhing mass of roots and fire at the heart of the ruined city. Her daughters were scattered, some fully consumed by the chaos, while others retained fragments of their former selves. The Chaos Flame also gave rise to the demons that now infest the lands. These creatures born from the witch's failure are a constant reminder of her desperate gamble to save the world. The once great city of Izalith was reduced to a molten wasteland, and the witch's tragic transformation left her trapped, mindless, and consumed by her own creation. When the chosen undead arrives in Lost Izalith, they confront the Bed of Chaos. This fight is not a traditional battle but more of a desperate struggle against the entity's immense size and destructive attacks. The Bed of Chaos lashes out attacks with sweeping strikes and collapsing the floor, making the encounter feel chaotic and unpredictable. At its core lies the shattered remnants of the witch's soul, guarded by the roots of the monstrous form she has become. The tragedy of the Witch of Izalith lies with her intentions. She sought to save the world and preserve the Age of Fire, believing her actions were for the greater good. However, her failure brought her only suffering, not just for herself, but for her daughters and the people of Izalith. Her transformation into the Bed of Chaos turned her into a mindless guardian of the very destruction she had hoped to prevent. The chosen undead's defeat of the Bed of Chaos is bittersweet. While it ends the threat of the Chaos Flame spreading further, it also puts an end to the witch's suffering. Though she has long since lost her mind, her story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the tragic cost of trying to control forces beyond understanding. If you've made it this far, I just want to say thank you. Also, I want to talk about something pertaining to Morgott. So, in the hero video, I spoke about Morgott being a tragic hero, and you might be confused why I place him here in the villain video. Well, you see, while Morgott is somewhat of an unknown hero in the lore, trying his best to protect the capital of Leyndell, in our eyes, he's a straight up villain, as he tries his best to prevent us from being Elden Lord by, well, trying to kill us. So, that's why I still placed him here. No, I want to say thanks to my Patreon members, Jabroni Jones, Daniel Scotland, and Mac. Thank you guys for the extra support, and thanks to all of y'all who watched this video.